Hey there guys, how's it going? Nordic Warrior here. So, there's been a lot of talk recently about a potential fight between Manny Pacquiao and Terence Crawford. As we know, there's been a lot of negotiation. There's been talks about Crawford, whether he's going to be fighting Sean Porter or whether he's going to be fighting Pacquiao. And there's been a lot of rumors and talks of offers of 1 million, 2 million, 10 million, 40 million. Who knows how many millions that have been thrown around in the media. And we've been hearing a lot of rumors and just a lot of negotiations, but not any real confirmations as I record this video anyway. And what I wanted to talk about is because one thing that I see as being a very, very strong possibility of happening in the near future is I think that there is a very good chance that Manny Pacquiao might be, if he's not Terence Crawford's next opponent, I do think he's got a chance of being his next opponent. But if he's not his next opponent, then I do see him fighting Manny Pacquiao at some point, and I could see this potentially being Manny Pacquiao's final professional fight. I think that he wants that fight, and I think that he has wanted to fight Terence Crawford for quite a while. I think he really does want that fight, and I'll talk about that later. But I wanted to talk about it because, in my personal opinion, and look, before anybody gets their knickers in a twist and gets offended and hits the dislike button and writes a few angry comments and says, I'm going to come back here in a few months' time and this, that, and the other, whatever. Before anybody gets offended, let me just say that, look, the title of this video is a little bit hyperbole, alright? I'm not flat out stating that Manny Pacquiao is going to demolish Terence Crawford and knock him out early and that it's an easy fight or anything. I'm not going to be that bold, okay? The title of the video is just because I wanted to sum up my overall point with a catchy title rather than going into detail and having it be too long and convoluted, okay? So, yeah, the title of the video is hyperbole, so don't just read the video's title and then get triggered, okay? At least listen to what I have to say. Now, I've said for a while, and I've believed for a while, that if this fight were to happen, I would favour Manny Pacquiao. I think that he could not only beat Terence Crawford, but I think he could beat Terence Crawford convincingly. Now, I know that there's a narrative out there that's been around for quite a while, that's been spun by the boxing media, that Pacquiao avoided this fight. I mean, first of all, just before I go any further, I mean, the idea that Manny Pacquiao is scared of anybody, let alone somebody like Terence Crawford, is just laughable and just it's so disingenuous to even suggest that, because this is a guy in Manny Pacquiao who has proven his mettle time and time again over the years. He's proven his balls, proven his heart, proven his courage. He's never ducked anybody. Okay, yeah, there are fights here and there that maybe didn't materialize for one reason or another, but to suggest that Manny Pacquiao is in any way, shape, or form scared of another guy, I mean, if there's anybody in boxing that has proven, time and time again to not be scared of anybody, it's Manny Pacquiao. Okay, so again, the narrative that he somehow doesn't want to fight Crawford or priced himself out, it's just a complete joke, in my opinion. The reason this fight didn't happen 4 or 5 years ago when both guys were with Top Rank, because that would have seemed like the likely option. It would have seemed like an easier fight to make back then. The reason why it didn't is very simple, guys, and that is because Terence Crawford wasn't ready. Okay, Bob Arum even stated that his matchmakers don't think, this was of course back then, they didn't think that Terence Crawford had the experience yet to beat Pacquiao. They thought it was too dangerous, and of course they would have liked to have used Pacquiao to build up Crawford's name. They would have loved to kind of have a passing of the torch fight, kind of like what they did with Timothy Bradley. You remember they had Timothy Bradley signed to the Top Rank stable, and they used Pacquiao to make a star out of Bradley. Of course, it backfired on them because the backlash to that robbery was so severe that they had to give Pacquiao the rematch, and he ultimately ended up beating Timothy Bradley 3 times. And yeah, that whole situation never really went how they were expecting it to. But I digress. Obviously, Bob Arum and Top Rank have invested a lot of time and a lot of money into Terence Crawford, and they want to ensure, like, if that fight was to ever happen, they would want to ensure that Terence Crawford would win. And I mean, winning by robbery isn't even enough. He would need to win the fight convincingly, like Bradley wasn't able to do, in order to build his name off of Pacquiao. So yeah, it's an interesting situation, and I think it's very clear why the fight didn't happen back when they were both with Top Rank. But now, though, there seems to be a lot of intrigue involving the negotiations with that fight. We're hearing that Manny Pacquiao apparently offered Terence Crawford 10 million, or or there was 40 million on the table or whatever, and Manny Pacquiao was going to take the lion's share. And there's been, who knows what's really going on, but there's been a lot of talk and a lot of rumors about a negotiation for that fight. And I'm just here to tell you guys that I think people are going to be absolutely shocked by the outcome of this fight. I think that Manny Pacquiao can beat Terence Crawford. I really do. So let's talk about it. Now, what I can't seem to get out of my head in regards to matching up this fight and how it would go is the fact that when you get a situation like this with Manny Pacquiao has historically proven the odds wrong in this type of situation. For example, going back a long time ago, going back more than a decade ago, when he fought Oscar De La Hoya, it's easy to forget in retrospect what happened and what the narrative was with that situation. But you guys remember going into that fight, that was seen as a mismatch. People thought that Oscar De La Hoya was not only going to beat Manny Pacquiao, but they thought he was going to demolish him. There were people saying that De La Hoya is going to knock Pacquiao out in 4 rounds. He's going to walk him down and stop him and break him down and destroy him. And De La Hoya is just too big, too skilled, too durable, too powerful, too strong, too experienced, and he's just going to demolish Manny Pacquiao. That fight was actually seen, and it's funny to say this in retrospect, but that was actually seen as a retirement fight for Pacquiao. It was seen as a cash-out fight. That he had reached the pinnacle of his career. He'd become a pound-for-pound level fighter, and that was basically his cash-out fight. He'd moved up 2 weights, and he was going to fight a legend in Oscar De La Hoya. He was going to get knocked out, and then he was going to retire. That was the narrative on that fight. But of course, that wasn't what happened. Manny Pacquiao went in there and was too fast, too sharp, too skilled, too accurate, and he absolutely demolished Oscar De La Hoya. Of course, after the fight came the excuses. Everybody said, "Oh, De La Hoya was weight drained," even though he chose the weights for the fight, so that doesn't make any sense. They say, yeah, he just couldn't pull the trigger anymore. He didn't make the weight comfortable, and he was past his prime. I think he was like 35 years old, which isn't really that old, but yeah, he was a little bit past his prime, and he had shown signs of wear and tear, but that wasn't the narrative going into the fight, was it? And personally, and I know some people might disagree here, but personally, I don't think that De La Hoya would ever have been able to beat Pacquiao based on styles. I think that Pacquiao was just too fast and too sharp, and I think he would have gotten in and out the way he did. He would have just peppered him with the straight left, and he would have made Oscar De La Hoya reached and countered him with that quick right hook. And I just don't think that version of Pacquiao that night would have lost to any version of De La Hoya. I don't really think the size was an issue. Pacquiao has always done pretty well against fighters who are taller and heavier than him. I mean, look at what he did to Margarita, for example. So Manny Pacquiao has shown historically that when he's in a situation where he's fighting a bigger guy and a guy who's expected to just walk through him, he tends to turn the odds on its head, doesn't he? And he tends to win those fights. I thought going into the Keith Thurman fight, and you could go look at any of my videos, I was really, really undecided on how that fight would go, because to me, Keith Thurman stylistically presented a big problem for Pacquiao, maybe even more of a problem than Thurman does. Than Crawford does. And the reason why I say that is because Keith Thurman has a type of style where he's constantly bouncing around the ring, constantly running around, throwing lots of arm punches, straight punches, combinations, lots of volume, and in collaboration with the movement. And I had a feeling that based on Crawford's style, that was going to make it difficult for Pacquiao to win, because Crawford might be nicking the rounds. He's one of these fighters, Crawford, isn't he? Who he has quite a good knack for stealing and nicking rounds. So even if he's being outfought or outboxed, he can just run around and move around and throw lots of straight punches and lots of arm punches and kind of fool the judges with flurries and tippy tap type punches. And I felt that was a type of style that a 40-year-old Manny Pacquiao, who maybe doesn't have the foot speed or the timing that he used to have, would struggle with. And of course, at times he did struggle, but he actually still won the fight convincingly. He still was able to drop Crawford. He still was able to drop Thurman. He was still able to get him to the body. He was still able to outmuscle him and outwork him at times. And really, the flurries that Thurman was throwing and all that stuff he was doing was all superficial. He didn't really have any effect on Pacquiao. So even if he were able to nick some rounds and make it close on the scorecards, of course the fight was a split decision, which was absurd. But that was my concern going into it. Was Thurman's very good at doing that. He's very good at confusing the judges and nicking rounds. So that was a tough fight for Pacquiao in order to overcome those issues. And I just felt that was a really, really hard fight for this stage of Pacquiao's career, where he's obviously older and past his prime. But Terence Crawford, in my opinion, doesn't present that type of a problem. To me, Terence Crawford is the type of fighter that Pacquiao has always historically done well against, in the sense that, yeah, he's quite big, he's quite physically well built for the division. He's obviously going to have a size advantage over Pacquiao. He's obviously going to be physically stronger. He may even be a bigger puncher. But Manny Pacquiao is so much faster than Terence Crawford, not just in terms of his foot speed and moving around the ring, but even in terms of his hand speed and his combination punching. Terence Crawford has historically shown in his career that he struggles with speed. I mean, when he fought Amir Khan was hitting him at will here and there. Even Kell Brook was able to hit him non-stop in the first couple of rounds of that fight. He was hitting Crawford pretty easily and timing him pretty easily. So to me, Terence Crawford is vulnerable to speed, and he strikes me as a fighter who could be outboxed. Obviously, when you look at guys like Khan and Brook, those guys were severely damaged going into that fight. I mean, Amir Khan has been a shell of his former self for many years. He's had multiple KO defeats to endure. And of course, Kell Brook was severely drained. I mean, Kell Brook hadn't fought at welterweight in a number of years. The last major opponent he fought stopped him in 5 rounds, and he had those two defeats to Golovkin and and of course the Errol Spence fight. Those were the 2 fights, the only 2 major opponents that he had fought in the years prior to the Crawford fight. So Kell Brook, to me, just, and I said this before the fight, he was damaged goods going into that fight. He was severely weight drained, had taken 2 beatings in his career, and I just don't really think he had a whole lot to offer. I think that fight was a circumstantial type of victory for Crawford. And you could say that about a lot of Crawford's fights. A lot of his victories have been circumstantial. I don't really think he's anywhere near as good or as talented as he's made out to be. So I've always felt that this is a fight that Pacquiao could win, and win convincingly. I could see him doing what Khan did, in the sense that he's just throwing flurries in and out, move around, in and out, jump in with a straight left. Sometimes Pacquiao will lead off with a straight left, and he'll sort of disguise it by coming in at a strange angle, and he'll also disguise it with a very good jab. You look at when he fought Adrian Broner a couple of fights ago, he was just in and out constantly, and he would catch Broner on the ropes and hit him with a combination to the body. And even at his advanced years, even though he was like 40 years old in that fight, Pacquiao still had the quicker feet and the quicker hands than Adrian Broner. And I don't think that Terence Crawford, obviously Terence Crawford is a better fighter than Broner, but I don't think he's as fast as Broner in terms of his hand speed. I don't think Crawford is particularly that fast by comparison to someone like Broner, and he doesn't really have the volume or the movement that someone like Thurman has. And I'm not saying that he wouldn't beat Thurman. I'm not saying that he wouldn't beat Broner. I would favour Crawford to beat those guys, but those guys have certain attributes which are a little bit more difficult for someone like Pacquiao to deal with. I just think that stylistically, Pacquiao presents more of a problem for Crawford than other guys Crawford has fought in his career. I don't think Crawford has ever fought anybody as skilled as Pacquiao. All right, Pacquiao has more boxing skill than anybody Crawford has fought. Pacquiao is faster, with the exception of maybe Amir Khan, who has slightly faster hands than Pacquiao. Pacquiao is faster than anyone else that Crawford has fought, and Pacquiao has better punching technique than Khan, better footwork than Khan, better balance, better stamina. Even at this stage of his career, he still has better stamina and better balance than somebody like Khan. So, to me, I think that Manny Pacquiao could beat Terence Crawford. I mean, some people will point out Pacquiao's losses, like the Jeff Horn fight. That wasn't really a loss. He beat Jeff Horn. It was a disgraceful robbery. They point out the Mayweather fight. Pacquiao clearly beat Mayweather. Anyone that says otherwise doesn't know shit about boxing. The only reason he lost that fight, the only reason he didn't get the decision, is because it's Mayweather, and nobody gets a decision against Mayweather. It is what it is. What do you expect? I mean, Mayweather can spend 12 rounds running away on the ropes, not throwing a single punch, getting outlanded and outworked, and then win 120, 108 on the scorecards and have all the commentators calling it a masterclass. That's how Mayweather's whole career has been. It's been one big optical illusion. And Manny Pacquiao completely outboxed him, and got shamefully robbed on the scorecards. It is what it is. So in recent years, Pacquiao hasn't really lost legitimately. The only loss that in recent years that was a legitimate one was the Marquez fight. And even if you look at the Bradley situation, I mean the first one was one of the biggest scandals in recent memory. I think everybody would agree that he clearly, I mean, it was like a 10-2 situation. It wasn't even competitive. And then we saw what happened in the two rematches. So are you guys really that confident looking at Terence Crawford and how Terence Crawford's been looking against pretty subpar opposition? Are you guys really, really that confident that he would beat Pacquiao at this stage? I mean, I know Pacquiao's 42, I get it. I know he's half Terence Crawford's size. I know he's a former flyweight. But I've got a feeling that history is about to repeat itself here. Because, again, going into the De La Hoya fight, nobody gave Pacquiao a chance. Okay, going into the Thurman fight, a lot of people didn't give him a chance. All right, I think I picked Pacquiao to win, but I had a feeling it was going to be a robbery. I think I pointed that out in my prediction that I've got a feeling Thurman will just nick the rounds and win by a controversial decision, which almost happened. But if you actually score the fight fairly, Pacquiao wins easily, let's be honest. And like I was saying earlier in the video, it's not enough for Crawford to win by a robbery. All right, Top Rank want to turn Crawford into a star. They want to get pay-per-views out of him because the guy has no fans and the guy has no mass appeal. So in order to make a pay-per-view star out of Crawford, he has to beat Pacquiao. He has to knock Pacquiao out. He has to do the same thing to Pacquiao that Marquez did in the fourth fight. He needs to land a big shot and he needs to have a highlight reel knockout because it needs to be a passing of the torch situation for him. So I've got a feeling that there may be a little bit of a chip on Crawford's shoulder as the fight happens, and I can see Pacquiao outboxing him and beating Crawford on points. I don't think he'll stop Crawford. Look, Pacquiao generally doesn't stop people nowadays. He does score knockdowns, like he put Jesse Vargas on his ass, he put Bradley on his ass, he put Thurman on his ass, and he of course put Matisse on his ass several times and stopped him. But Terence Crawford has shown a pretty sturdy chin, better chin than those guys, and I don't think Pacquiao will stop him. But I think it's a very, very good possibility that Pacquiao might beat Terence Crawford on points. I think it's a really strong possibility. So, yeah, just something to think about here. I think Manny Pacquiao can beat Terence Crawford. I think it's a very, very good possibility. And I think that even if Crawford's able to win, I think people will be surprised by how much of a struggle it is for him, by how much Manny Pacquiao exposes his limitations. So, yeah, I would favour Pacquiao in the fight even now. So let me know what you guys think anyway. Just something to think about. Stay tuned for more content. Thanks for watching, and yeah, God bless.